My name's Hazel Carter, and I've made a lot of good choices in my life. I worked hard, I stayed honest, I tried to be better than where I came from, but one bad choice, one desperate, stupid, unforgivable choice, it almost ruined everything. I tell myself I had no other way out, that maybe in another life, I'd still be the girl who believed in clean hands and second chances. Now I'm just trying to figure out how to fix what's left, because even if the world doesn't forgive me, I still want to forgive myself. I grew up in a trailer park just outside Mobile, Alabama, where rust clung to everything, the doors, the cars, even people's dreams. The air always smelled like fried oil and cigarette smoke, and the nights were louder than the days. My parents, Lisa and Frank Carter, were the kind of people who loved hard and drank harder. Their love was loud, sometimes laughter that shook the walls, sometimes screaming that did the same. There was never much food in the fridge, but there was always beer, cheap vodka, and half-smoked cigarettes in the ashtray. Mom worked nights at a gas station. Dad fixed cars when he felt like showing up. The rest of the time, they sat on the trailer steps, chain-smoking, talking about dreams they'd never chase. They fought about everything: the bills, the noise, the neighbors, whose turn it was to pawn the TV. And sometimes they fought about me, about how I was too quiet or too good for this place, depending on who was sober enough to care. On good days, Mom would sing along to the radio while frying canned sausage, and Dad would dance with her, clumsy and half-drunk, his laughter filling the kitchen. On bad days, which were most days, plates broke, doors slammed, and I'd sit outside on the porch steps, staring at the sky, trying to imagine what it would feel like to breathe air that didn't taste like smoke and regret. I used to lie awake, listening to them through the thin trailer walls, whispering to myself, I won't end up like them. It became my prayer, my promise, my survival plan. When I was 17, I packed a duffel bag and wrote a note I never sent. I love you, but I can't stay here. If I don't leave now, I never will. Mom once told me, people like us don't get out, Hazel. And I remember looking her straight in the eye and saying, then I'll be the first. The day I left Mobile, the sky looked like dull tin, heavy, gray, and ready to crack open. I sat by the window of a Greyhound bus, clutching my old duffel bag and an envelope that held everything I owned, $207, a folded photo of my mom when she still smiled, and a one-way ticket to Los Angeles. I didn't know a single person there. I didn't even know what I wanted to do. All I knew was that I couldn't stay. The ride was long, 2 days of fast food, strangers' snores, and endless desert. Somewhere in Texas, I counted my money again just to make sure it hadn't vanished. Every mile that rolled past the window felt like I was peeling away a layer of my old life. The shouting, the empty fridge, the smell of beer and regret. When I finally stepped off the bus in LA, the air hit me like I'd walked into another world, sharp with car exhaust and heat, loud with sirens and voices. Everyone seemed to be going somewhere important. I stood there with my bag, trying to look like I belonged. That first week, I didn't. I slept in a cheap hostel, shared a room with 5 strangers, and spent my days walking until my feet blistered. I asked for work everywhere, diners, gas stations, motels, but nobody wanted a girl with no experience, no car, and an accent that screamed, out of town. Eventually, a manager at a 24-hour diner took pity on me. I worked night shifts, pouring coffee and wiping counters for people who didn't look me in the eye. The pay was bad, the tips worse, but it was something. Still, every morning when the sun came up and the streets grew quiet, I'd walk home and tell myself, you didn't come here just to survive. A few months later, while scrolling through Craigslist on a borrowed laptop, I saw a post. House cleaner needed. Trustworthy, reliable, must-have references. I didn't have references, but I had desperation and neat handwriting. I sent a message anyway. The woman's name was Maria Alvarez. She lived in a quiet neighborhood near Silver Lake, and the first time I stepped into her house, I thought I'd made a mistake. Everything was bright, organized, and smelled like vanilla candles. There were no beer cans, no yelling, no chaos, just peace. Maria looked me over and said, you seem like someone who needs a chance. She handed me a mop. Let's start small. I worked 6 hours straight that day. When I finished, she paid me $80 and handed me a sandwich. Nobody had made me food in years. The next week, she called me again. Then another client found me through her, and another. Soon I was cleaning 5 houses a week. Families, couples, widows who told me stories while I dusted their shelves. My hands were cracked from bleach, but every dollar I earned felt clean. I shared a small apartment with Carla, a waitress I met at the diner. She was chaos wrapped in sunshine, the kind of person who laughed with her whole body. She'd play music while we folded laundry and say, "You're the serious one, Hazel. You gotta let life in sometimes." Little by little, I started to. Maria became more than just a client. She was a mentor, I guess. One afternoon, she sat me down with her laptop and said, "You're not just cleaning, Hazel. You're rebuilding. Start saving. Learn where your money goes." I listened. I started tracking every payment, saving a few dollars a week. I even opened a notebook I titled Future. Inside, I wrote small goals: a car, a real apartment, maybe a college class one day. For the first time in my life, I didn't wake up scared. My rent was paid, my fridge was full, and when I walked into those big houses to clean, I didn't feel like trash. I felt proud. I wasn't rich, not even close, but I had peace. I had routine. I had a life that didn't make me want to run. And maybe that's what hope really is. Not fireworks or miracles, but quiet mornings when you realize you've built something steady out of nothing. A fragile dream, yes, but it was mine. It was a Tuesday night when the past finally caught up with me. I was scrubbing the kitchen counter in Maria's house, humming along to the radio, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally, I wouldn't have picked up. Telemarketers, scams, bad news. But something in my chest told me to. "Is this Hazel Carter?" The voice was male, distant, official. "Yes," I said, wiping my hands on my jeans. "This is Officer Daniels with the Mobile Police Department. I'm afraid I have some difficult news." For a second, I thought maybe it was about a ticket or something dumb from years ago. But then his tone shifted, and everything inside me went still. "Your parents, Lisa and Frank Carter, were involved in a car accident on Highway 45 earlier today. I'm sorry, ma'am. Neither of them survived." I didn't say anything. I didn't cry. I just stood there, frozen, while the world around me blurred into noise. The radio kept playing, some upbeat pop song, and I remember thinking how wrong it sounded, how life shouldn't keep going when yours just stopped. The officer kept talking, something about next of kin, arrangements, identification. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. Then I hung up. For a long time, I just stared at the countertop I'd been cleaning, watching a small pool of water slide off the edge and drip onto the tile. I felt like I was floating above myself, watching a stranger react to news that didn't belong to her. My parents, dead. I hadn't spoken to them in 2 years, not since the night I left Mobile and promised myself I'd never look back. Every time I thought about calling, I'd find an excuse. No time, no words, no reason. Now, there would never be a chance. The guilt came slow, like a tide. At first, it just touched my toes, a faint discomfort, and then it swallowed me whole. Maria found me sitting on the kitchen floor holding my phone. "Hazel? What happened?" I could barely speak. "They're gone," I whispered. "My parents. A car crash." She knelt beside me, her hand gentle on my shoulder. "Oh, sweetheart." That night, I didn't sleep. I kept hearing my mother's voice, the last words she said before I left. "You think you're better than us? You'll see. Life's gonna chew you up too." And she was right, in her own bitter way. Life was chewing, and I didn't even have the strength to swallow. The next morning, I booked a flight home. One way. I told Carla I didn't know how long I'd be gone. She hugged me tight and slipped a pack of tissues into my bag. "You'll be okay," she said. "You always are." But on that flight to Alabama, I didn't feel strong. I felt small again, the same scared girl who used to hide under the kitchen table while her parents screamed. When the plane landed, Mobile felt smaller too. The air was thick, heavy with humidity and memories. Everything looked the same. The cracked roads, the same gas station, even the rusted sign near the trailer park that still flickered half-dead letters. The funeral was simple. 2 pine caskets side by side in a church that smelled like old flowers. A few neighbors came, mostly out of curiosity. The pastor said kind words that didn't sound true. They loved their daughter deeply. I wanted to believe that, I really did. When it was over, I stayed behind after everyone left. The sun was setting and I stood there staring at the dirt, trying to feel something. Grief, anger, relief, anything real. But all I felt was this hollow ache, like I'd missed my chance at closure. I whispered, "I'm sorry," even though I didn't know for what. For leaving? For surviving? For not becoming the daughter they wanted? Then I took a deep breath and said goodbye. Not to them, but to the version of myself who still needed their love. When I walked back to the car, my phone buzzed again. A text from Maria. "We're thinking of you. Don't rush back. Take care of yourself." I didn't know it yet, but that trip home, that moment at their graves, would be the beginning of everything that unraveled next. The day after the funeral, I went back to the trailer to start sorting through what was left of my parents' lives. The place looked smaller than I remembered. The paint was chipped, the air heavy with the smell of mold and beer. There were still half-empty bottles on the counter, stacks of unopened mail, and a broken lamp lying on the floor. It was like time had stopped the moment I left. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where my father used to count his pay in crumpled bills, and started opening the mail. Most of it was junk. Overdue utility notices, credit card statements, a final shut-off warning. But then I found a thick envelope with no return address. Inside were papers stamped in red. Final notice, DeLuca Financial Group. At first I thought it was just another payday loan. My parents were always borrowing from somewhere. But as I kept reading, my stomach tightened. Total owed, $230,000. There were handwritten notes in the margins, scribbled with threats and deadlines. I didn't even finish the letter before I heard a knock on the door. 2 men stood outside. One was tall, clean-shaven, wearing a leather jacket despite the heat. The other, older, with a scar running down his cheek. They didn't look like debt collectors. They looked like people you didn't say no to. "You Hazel Carter?" the tall one asked. "Yeah," I said cautiously. He held up a manila folder. "We represent Tony DeLuca. Your parents owed him a lot of money. You're the only one left." "I didn't borrow anything," I said quickly. "That's not my debt." The older man laughed. "Family debt doesn't die with the family, sweetheart. Somebody's got to make it right." I felt my pulse racing. "I don't have that kind of money." "Then you better start figuring out how to get it," the tall one said. "Mr. DeLuca doesn't like to be disappointed." They started walking away. Then the older one turned back, his voice almost calm. "We'll give you time, Hazel. But don't think about running. We always find people who try." They left without another word. I stood there, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Outside, kids were playing in the next trailer yard, laughing, chasing each other with water guns, like life wasn't crumbling just a few steps away. That night, I drove to the sheriff's office in town. I didn't know what else to do. The officer at the front desk looked at me like I was wasting his time. "I think my parents were involved with someone dangerous," I said, placing the letter on the counter. He read it, sighed, and handed it back. "DeLuca's been around for years. We can't do much without a direct threat. You should probably just settle whatever you can." "Settle?" I said, almost laughing. "With what money?" He shrugged. "I'm sorry, miss. Be careful, and don't stay here too long." That was all he had to say. No help, no protection, just a warning. I went back to the trailer that night and couldn't sleep. Every sound outside, a car passing, a dog barking, made me jump. I packed a bag before sunrise and locked the door behind me, though I knew locks wouldn't stop people like them. Before leaving, I stood in the doorway one last time, looking at the small, broken space where my childhood began and ended. "Goodbye," I whispered. "For real this time." I caught a bus back to Los Angeles that same morning. I watched the miles blur past, trying to convince myself that distance meant safety. But somewhere deep down, I knew it didn't. When I got home, Carla was waiting with open arms. "You okay?" I nodded, lying through my teeth. "Yeah, just tired." But at night, when the apartment was quiet, I kept replaying those men's voices in my head. Family debt doesn't die with the family. We always find people who try to run. I started looking over my shoulder everywhere I went. On the bus, at the houses I cleaned, even walking home. Every unfamiliar car made me nervous. Every shadow felt too close. I didn't tell Maria or Carla the truth. I couldn't. They'd worry, or worse, they'd try to help. And help was dangerous when men like DeLuca were involved. So I smiled through it, worked harder, kept moving. But I could feel it coming. The part where everything I'd built would start to crack. I thought I'd escaped my parents' life. Turns out it just found a new way to catch me. When I got back to LA, I told myself I could fix it. That if I just worked harder, saved every dollar, I could pay them off and make this nightmare go away. I started picking up double shifts, scrubbing tile until my hands cracked, polishing floors until midnight. I took every client I could find, even the ones who paid late or treated me like I was invisible. But even after 3 weeks, when I counted everything I had, every tip, every crumpled 20, it wasn't even close, not even a fraction of $230,000. I sold my car next. It wasn't much, a used Honda, dented on both sides, but it got me a few thousand. I walked to jobs after that, sometimes an hour each way because the bus routes didn't line up. I skipped meals, watered down shampoo, reused sponges until they disintegrated. And still, nothing. A drop in an ocean I could never cross. Then, the messages started. At first, it was just numbers from strange area codes, unknown senders, blank texts. Then photos began to appear. One of the front of my building, then my street, then me locking my door. No words, no threats, just proof. Proof that they were watching. The first time I saw my own face on my phone screen, my stomach turned so hard I almost threw up. I deleted the photos, blocked the numbers, but new ones came from different phones. I stopped sleeping. Every time headlights passed through my window, I thought they'd come for me. Every knock on the door made my heart slam. I started checking the peephole every few minutes, even when I knew no one was there. Carla noticed. "You okay?" she asked one morning as we drank instant coffee at the kitchen counter. "Yeah," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just tired, too much work." She frowned. "You're losing weight, Hazel. You look pale." "I'm fine." But I wasn't. I was unraveling quietly, one piece at a time. I thought about going to the police, about showing them the photos and telling them about DeLuca's men. But then I remembered the officer back in Mobile, how easily he brushed me off. I knew what they'd say. There's no proof, no direct threat. Come back when something happens. I couldn't wait for something to happen, so I worked harder, saved more, tried to disappear into routine. But fear has a way of finding cracks. Every time I cleaned a client's house, surrounded by marble counters, silk curtains, jewelry cases, I felt the sharp divide between their world and mine. They had everything. I had a number I could never reach. Maria noticed too. "Hazel, you've been so quiet lately," she said one afternoon. "Is something wrong?" I forced another smile. "Just tired." She put a hand on my arm. "You know, you can always talk to me." I nodded, but didn't say a word. Because if I told her, she'd try to help. And if she tried to help, she might get hurt. That night, I sat on my bed with my phone glowing in the dark. Another message. This one said, "TikTok, Hazel. Time's running out. No photo, no name. Just the reminder that I was living on borrowed time." I looked around my small apartment, the chipped dresser, the thrift store mirror, the faded curtains. I thought of everything I'd built from nothing. The life I'd promised myself would be decent, honest, clean. And then I thought of what it would feel like to lose it all. Not because of something I did, but because of what my parents left behind. For the first time, a dangerous thought crossed my mind. Not fully formed, not planned, just a flicker in the dark. I cleaned houses filled with things worth more than I'd make in a year. Necklaces, watches, cash hidden in drawers. And I knew those people, trusted me. They'd never suspect me. I shoved the thought away like something dirty, but it didn't leave. It lingered, patient and persistent, whispering at the edges of my exhaustion. I told myself I'd never be like my parents. But life had a cruel way of testing promises. I still remember the way Mrs. Green's house smelled that day, lavender and old wood polish, the faint sweetness of cookies cooling on the counter. I had been there for almost 3 hours, dusting bookshelves and vacuuming the living room when my eyes fell on the dresser in her bedroom. There, glinting in the afternoon light, were diamond earrings. Small, delicate, impossibly valuable. My heart stopped. I blinked, stared, picked up the rag again, pretending to polish the dresser, but my fingers twitched. I tried to push the thought away. You don't steal, Hazel. You've built a life, you've worked hard. You're not like your parents. But the messages from DeLuca's men were fresh in my mind. The pictures of my street, my face, the TikTok texts that had haunted me the night before. I couldn't pay them with what I had. I never would. Not in time. I glanced at the earrings again. They were just sitting there, almost daring me. I imagined the money, a giant chunk of what I owed gone in a single move. I imagined the feeling of not being terrified for 1 second, even just for one day. My hand shook, and then, somehow, it moved on its own. I slipped the earrings into the small pocket inside my cleaning apron, pretending to dust the dresser for a second, then moving on to the next task like nothing had happened. I left the house, trying to walk normally, my stomach a tight knot. By the time I got home, I had to sit down on the edge of my bed and just breathe. The next morning, I sold the earrings. $8,000. $8,000 I had never seen in one place before. $8,000 that erased a sliver of the impossible debt I carried on my back. And I cried, not because of the money, but because of what I had done. I sat on the floor of my apartment, clutching the crumpled bills, and whispered into the dim room, just this once. But I knew that it would never really be just once. I thought about Mrs. Green, sweet, frail, the woman who'd always asked about my life, offered me tea when she thought I looked tired, smiled when I finished cleaning. I imagined her noticing the earrings were gone, feeling violated, betrayed. I couldn't let myself dwell on that for too long. Fear was waiting. Debt was waiting. And I had a plan, as much as I hated that word. I cried again that night, but not just from guilt, from exhaustion, from fear, from the surreal mix of relief and horror that hit me like a storm. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a tiny, trembling voice whispered, "You're not a thief. You're surviving." I clung to that whisper as I lay in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, trying to convince myself that survival could justify everything. But deep down, I knew I'd crossed a line. And lines, once crossed, are never easy to step back from. Months passed, and the fear that had once paralyzed me became a dull, constant hum, something I carried in the pit of my stomach, like a secret weight I couldn't set down. I became careful, methodical, calculating. Only small, high-value items, never from the same house twice. Watches, necklaces, rings I could slip into the small pocket I kept hidden in my apron. I left everything else untouched. Fragile vases, cash, anything that could raise suspicion too quickly. I learned to read houses the way I read people. Which drawers were likely to be empty? Which bedrooms held the valuables? How to work fast, silent, and unseen. I kept a mental map of every client's schedule, every exit, every weak point. By the time the months had rolled into half a year, I had nearly paid off the debt. $230,000 piece by piece now shrank into a number that felt within reach. For a moment, I allowed myself a flicker of hope. One more job, then I'm free. But the universe has a cruel way of testing the desperate. Detective Ryan Mitchell entered my life quietly. At first, it was nothing. Just a uniformed officer in my peripheral vision when I returned home late. A scribbled note in the police log I saw while cleaning a house. But soon, I noticed patterns. Questions at houses I'd cleaned months ago. Neighbors mentioning someone asking about missing items. A sense of someone following the breadcrumbs I didn't even know I left. Maria noticed too. Subtle things at first. A glance at a missing ring when a client's family heirloom turned up damaged. A slight narrowing of her eyes when she caught me lingering too long near the jewelry box. I could feel her suspicion pressing on me like a second skin, making me want to vanish into the mop bucket I carried every day. Still, I told myself, just one more job, one more, and it's over. I replayed it in my mind like a mantra. Careful, precise, silent. One more. Every night, I lay in my small apartment with Carla asleep in the next room, counting the numbers in my head. Each dollar that went to DeLuca's men felt like a stitch in the gaping wound of my debt. Each dollar earned through theft tightened the knot in my chest. I hated it, hated myself for it. But I also felt alive in a way I hadn't since leaving Mobile. The adrenaline, the quiet victories, the knowledge that I was outsmarting a dangerous game. It was intoxicating. And still, fear never left. Every noise outside my window made my pulse spike. Every unfamiliar car made me freeze mid-step. Every new client's schedule required new calculations, new patience, new nerves stretched taut like a wire ready to snap. Yet I carried on, because giving up wasn't an option, because survival doesn't wait for morality. I told myself over and over, just one more job, then I can breathe. Then I can finally be free. But in the back of my mind, deep and insistent, there was the truth I tried not to face. Every job brought me closer to freedom, and every job brought me closer to getting caught. And in a game like this, one slip could destroy everything. The morning air smelled faintly of coffee and fresh-cut grass when I arrived at Maria's house. Sunlight poured through the living room windows, warming the hardwood floors, making everything look peaceful, normal. For a few seconds, I almost forgot the life I had been living. The fear, the debt, the constant calculation of where the next stolen item would come from. I was dusting the shelves in her bedroom, humming softly, when a knock at the door froze me mid-swipe. Knock, knock. I set the rag down slowly, my chest tightening. It wasn't the usual rhythm of Maria coming home early or a neighbor stopping by. This was different, deliberate, firm. Before I could even think, the door opened. 2 uniformed police officers stood there, early morning sun casting long shadows behind them. And then I saw him, Detective Ryan Mitchell. His presence felt calm, almost gentle, but the weight of inevitability hung in the air like a storm cloud. "Hazel Carter?" he asked. "Yes," I whispered. "Police. We need to speak with you." I felt my knees weaken. My mind raced, every scenario I'd ever imagined flashing like a slideshow, running and getting caught anyway, pleading, screaming. But something inside me told me not to resist. Not today. Not ever. I nodded. "Okay." Detective Mitchell stepped closer, his eyes soft. "You don't look like a thief," he said quietly as he pulled the cuffs from his belt. His words were almost gentle, human, a strange comfort in the chaos that had become my life. I let him snap the cuffs around my wrists. Cold metal bit into my skin, and I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. Maria appeared in the doorway then, her face pale, eyes wide. "Hazel," she breathed. Devastation hung in her voice. The house, once warm and safe, now felt hollow, echoing the loss of trust she couldn't repair. I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I just wanted it to stop." She didn't move, didn't respond. She just stared, the silence heavier than words. The officers led me out the front door, the early morning calm shattered by the sharp click of the cuffs and the distant sound of birds taking flight. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, whispers following me like a trail of smoke. On the way to the car, I thought about everything that had led me here. The trailer and mobile, my parents, the debt that never should have been mine, every shift, every stolen item, every night I spent counting money and fear, it all rushed back like a torrent, leaving me hollow, exhausted, exposed. Detective Mitchell stayed near me, quiet, professional, but somehow understanding. "You did what you had to do," he said almost to himself. "But some lines you can't cross without consequences." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The ride to the station was silent, except for the occasional muffled instruction from the officers. I stared out the window at the city I had once believed could save me. The streets I had walked 1,000 times, the houses I had cleaned, the life I had built from sweat and hope. It all seemed fragile now, like it had never truly been mine. At the station, paperwork, fingerprints, photos, everything procedural, mechanical, unfeeling. I followed every instruction, every step, thinking about the number 230,000, the debt that had forced me down this path, and wondering if freedom would ever feel real again. I didn't cry until I was alone in the holding cell. Then the flood came. Tears, trembling, the release of months of fear and guilt. Weeks later, the sentence came. 3 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 2. I tried to feel anger, tried to feel regret, tried to feel hopelessness. Instead, I felt something else, a strange clarity. This was not the end of me. I would sit in that cell, count the days, and dream of what could be. I would imagine myself walking out of those gates, free from debt, free from fear, free from the ghosts of my parents and the mistakes I had made. I had crossed lines I never should have, yes, but even behind bars, I still believed in the idea of rebuilding. Not like before, not from the outside world's favor, but from somewhere deeper, somewhere stubborn and unbroken inside me. Because even a life started in rust and shadow could rise again. 2 years had passed since the cuffs snapped around my wrists at Maria's house. 2 years of counting days, of learning to breathe in spaces smaller than my chest could hold. Prison was nothing like the trailer and mobile, or even my tiny apartment in LA. There was structure, yes, but also silence, the kind that presses against your ears until you hear your own thoughts too loudly. Some days it was unbearable. Other days, it became a strange sort of comfort. I worked in the laundry, folding shirts and towels, pressing creases into the fabric with a precision that mirrored the discipline I was trying to build inside myself. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't fast, but it was mine. Every wrinkle I smoothed, every shirt stacked neatly, felt like a tiny victory in a world that had stolen so much from me. I read often. Maria had somehow managed to send me books, novels, biographies, self-help guides, and I devoured them, letting words carry me to places I couldn't go. Carla wrote letters too, filling pages with gossip from the city, updates about my favorite diners, jokes about old routines. I clung to those letters like lifelines, proof that the world outside still existed, proof that love could survive distance and mistakes. Money, of course, was tight. Every cent I earned in the prison laundry went into a small envelope I kept hidden under my mattress, a secret fund for my future. I calculated and planned, dreaming of the day I would walk out those gates and start fresh. Not rich, not reckless, but steady, safe, and entirely mine. Some nights, I'd sit on the edge of my bunk, pen in hand, writing in my journal. Words spilled onto the page, messy and honest. I still believe in clean starts. It became a mantra, a fragile but unshakable hope. Even when I imagined the world outside, with all its risks and temptations, I reminded myself, a clean start doesn't mean perfection. It means choice. It means rising again, despite everything. The yard became my sanctuary. I would stand there, feeling the sun on my face, listening to distant conversations, the clatter of routines, the laughter that sometimes escaped the fences. The wire fences framed the sky like a cage, but the sky itself was endless, and in it, I found a sense of peace. I wasn't free yet. Not truly. My body was contained, my movements limited, But my mind, my hope, was something no one could touch. I had survived the trailer, the debt, the fear, the choices I had made in desperation, and I would survive this too. Sometimes I closed my eyes and imagined the moment I would step out, the gate swinging open, the sun warm on my skin. I would carry my lessons with me: caution, patience, honesty, resilience. I would build slowly, carefully, and this time, the foundation would be mine alone. Until then, I waited. Folded laundry, read books, counted coins. I let the days pass, learning that patience was more than endurance. It was preparation. Every sunset I watched through the wire fence reminded me that endings could also be beginnings. And in that quiet, controlled life, I found a strange kind of freedom. Not the freedom of movement, but the freedom of thought, hope, and the unwavering belief that, no matter what had happened, I could choose the life I wanted when the time came. I put the pen down, closed my journal, and leaned against the fence. The sun dipped low, casting long, golden shadows across the yard. I wasn't free, not yet, but I was at peace, and I would be free one day.